Ashraf Nubani, fascinating man, fascinating perspective. He's a Muslim. He's a lawyer. He's legally blind. He has great perspective. I just ask him questions. I asked him questions about Muslim, about being a Muslim, and about Islam and Muhammad. And I gave Jesus perspective, and I asked what was Muhammad similar. I just love hearing the insight on that, and I think you're going to enjoy it. I also asked about how discipline is practiced in Islam, and how Muhammad viewed it, and how it's represented in the Quran. And it's a fascinating discussion on the society as a whole, and it gives me hope that we can be we can get over some of these stereotypes that aren't true, and we address a lot of those. And even if the perspective doesn't jive with your own, just listening. And he's genuine, he's confident, he's not arrogant at all, but he expresses what he feels. And it's a fascinating discussion, and I want more of them, more like this. I want to hear what others think that are different than mine. I want to hear their view and their perspective. I just enjoy it so much. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. The next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business? And it lasted over 25 years. Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family, and their passion, and their careers, and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Ashraf Nubani, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really am excited to talk to you. So, what needs to happen to bridge the gap? Islam's challenge for America. What needs to happen?
Well, I think that at least with my book and what I conceive, having lived here for over 50 years, is that we need to honestly bridge the gap in terms of opening up the conversation. I believe that there isn't a conversation going on, actually, because it's either happening in the wrong places, meaning, if, for example, the media, which doesn't give a correct portrayal of what's happening in the world and the situation of, let's say, Muslims in America, and it's not happening on the ground because of the misunderstanding or misconceptions that people have about Islam. But I think that everyone owes it to themselves to know what the reality is. We may differ in terms of our opinions, our backgrounds, our worldviews, but if we can't agree what we're discussing in an objective manner, then we have a real problem. So the hope was, or the hope is that we just open up the conversation, that people talk to each other. And ignorance is on both sides. Obviously, it's not just one-sided, but certainly for Muslims who live in the United States, they do have an advantage, because if they know what's happening in the world, or maybe the backgrounds that they come from as immigrants, and they have lived and know the West very well. And so that's actually an advantage. Whereas for some of us here in the West, we only know about the West and our current circumstances, and what we know about the outside world, let's say, is very limited, or is an incorrect perception of what's really out there.
So, what are some basics, Ashraf, that we should know as Westerners, as Americans, about Islam?
Well, to start with, that for because when we say the West, so up until recently, of course, with, let's say, the receding of Christianity, is that uh, Islam is not a different faith than Judaism or Christianity, in the sense that Muslims believe in the same God. Some people will have us believe that Muslims worship a different God, which is not true. So the very fact that the West, at least historically speaking, is Christian, this is actually a point of conversion rather than conflict.
Hmm.
That's one thing. The other thing that, but even more, and I think that's the most important thing. But in addition to that, if you recall, and maybe your listeners, or at least those who have gone to school, which I imagine is the majority of people, is when we study Western Civ, where do we start? We don't start with Greece. We don't start with the United States. We start with Sumeria, Babylonia,
Hmm.
Egypt. Well, that if that's Western Civ, then we're all Muslims. We're all then, or Muslims are then part of the West, and that's never changed. One of the things that's happened in history, and this is all verifiable facts, like this is objective information that anyone can look up. When the Muslims first appeared on the scene in the 7th century, and conquered parts of the what was then the Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, and conquered Persia, they took over a huge swath of land and became the inheritors of all previous civilizations had to offer, or the majority of civilizations had to offer, in terms of advancement and progress and so forth. And so the the science of the golden age of the Muslim empires, uh, uh, they preserved Greek thought, Greek philosophy, Greek science, and the Renaissance in Western Europe built on that. And that's rarely recognized among the general population. It's known amongst historians, academics in their fields, but no one has ever appreciated, admitted that, and acknowledged that. So Muslims are not really different in that respect. And so these are things, again, if we at least recognize these things, we may
Hmm.
differ on views, as I said, where to go from here, what to do, that kind of thing. But if we're differing on facts, or one side is ignorant as to the facts, then yeah, we're really in trouble. Westerners should also know that unlike the experience that the West has had with Christianity in terms of the authority of, say, the Catholic Church over people's lives, and then the response of the Protestant Reformation, and then the modern world, and then the postmodern world where religion is receding. For Muslims, traditionally, there hasn't been that same problem of faith and reason.
Hmm.
Muslims take faith and reason together. But in the West, it became such a problem that people had to give up their faith. And that's why we see that Christianity is receding. But at the same time, that didn't solve people's problems, meaning that human beings and humanity is still looking for the answers that we all want to ask as humans. Where did we come from? What is our purpose? And so forth. And Islam provides those answers, and was never, the Muslims were never torn from their original sources, which is the Quran and the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, as Muslims believe. Whereas in Christianity, as I said, if people don't believe that they were created, then they haven't answered the question of where did they come from, who they are, where they need to go, where they will end up, and so forth. So I think those three things people should know about Islam. and Muslims are like everyone else; they want the same things. So this clash of civilizations doesn't have to happen because, again, the West, the East is the West, and the West is the East. We're the ones who make the divisions.
Yeah, very true. You mentioned that Christianity is receding. Is it Christianity or all religions? I'm unfamiliar with this.
Um, so it's certainly in the West. I think there was a poll that was done in the UK, and for the first time since the poll has been taken, is that there are less than 50% of British citizens who consider themselves Christian.
I
So
see.
it's gone, yeah. And in Europe, that's a trend. Obviously, when you look at France, you look at other places. In the United States, the majority, the population of the States still identifies itself as Christian, and I think it's over 70%. But again, even that is coming down. I guess 50 years ago, 100 years ago, that was 100%, right?
Right.
Or so, or very close to that. So obviously, it's receding. In the world, it's a little different. There are almost 2.2. There are almost 2 billion Muslims in the world. Probably, whatever, say 1.9 billion. They say that there are over 2 billion Christians in the world, and that makes up half of the world's population right there. And so, yeah, there. So I think it depends on the area, but yes, in general, if you ask the elite of the West, they'll say all religion is receding because technology progress is going to overtake everything. And I think it's actually wishful thinking because, again, the postmodern world and built on the Enlightenment and neoliberalism and liberalism, it hasn't really solved our problems. Yes, it's
Mm.
given us technology, but it hasn't necessarily made us happier. It hasn't necessarily provided the answers, again, that we always seek. And um, and I don't think that it's really made us safer. Yes, in World War II, according to statistics, we lost 40, 50, 60, 70 million people, according to some of the statistics. But with the kind of technology we have now, we don't know what could happen. And look at natural disasters that are occurring, and sometimes they come in waves. It's one after another. And I don't see that we've actually solved these problems in a way that is satisfactory.
Yeah, often technology helps, and then often it hurts as well. It creates new problems, and people misuse things. Ashraf, what is the difference between Islam and Muslim?
So Islam is the religion, just like we would say Christianity, and Muslim, with an S, is the person who adheres to the faith of Islam, which would be a Christian. So it's like saying Christianity and Christian, Islam and Muslim.
Very good. I never heard anybody define it as such. And what should we know about Muhammad? I know that's a very wide question, Ashraf, but it's like, what should we know about Jesus? But
Exactly.
I
Exactly. People know it's a valid question and a very good question. It's people of the past, the historical figures of the past. Uh, all of us recognize certain figures in history, and actually, the Prophet Muhammad, not just among Muslims, but in the world, is probably one of the most recognized personalities, historical personalities in the world. And for Muslims, of course, beloved and a prophet, and for others, reviled or feared. And but he is one of the most documented lives in history as well. And what we should know about him is the sources, specifically the Muslim narrative about him. Uh, there was a book that was written in the 90s. It was published by Indiana University Press, I believe, and the author who I will remember, but the title was the 100 most influential persons in history, and in lo and behold, the number one person was Muhammad.
Hmm.
And he said, I know people, and this was a huge, I mean, it was a big book back then. We didn't have all of the modern marketing tools and so forth, but I'm sure it was the kind of book that would have sold over a million. But he put Prophet Muhammad number one, and he said, I know that people will disagree with me, but here are my criteria. And he said, of all of the people, so they're looking at influence, right? Who's influenced humanity
Mm.
over the history of humanity the most? And he said that he happened to be the one who was the most successful in the secular realm and in the religious realm. So he gave examples of Moses and Jesus, peace be upon them, is that Jesus's kingdom was going to be in heaven. It wasn't on earth. He had, yes, look at Christianity and the followers, even though I would attribute that to Paul more than Jesus himself. But he said that, but he didn't have a temporal kingdom on earth. Prophet Muhammad was actually supremely successful on both levels, as a religious leader and as a secular leader.
Mm.
And after his death, as I said, the Muslims conquered what was the half of the known world at the time. But and so he gave his reasons. He put I believe Jesus was second and Isaac Newton was third, or Isaac Newton was second and Jesus was third.
Wow.
What's interesting about these three people, by the way, something I don't think that I mentioned in the book, but I did later observe it, was that is that all three of these people believed in one God, as far as I'm concerned.
Hmm.
Meaning, Prophet Muhammad, of course, believed in one God, and he was the messenger of God in Islam. We also believe that Jesus was a messenger of God. We believe in Jesus, but not as divine or the Son of God. Because when you look at the Bible, he said the Father is greater than I. When he went into the Garden of Gethsemane in the Gospel, when they were coming after him, he moved away from his companions, the disciples, and he went and he prayed. He bowed his head and he said, God, remove this cup from me as you would have, not as I would have. And so he was praying to someone. And there are other, of course, verses that indicate that. So as far as I'm concerned, that he was a messenger of God, that's what it says in the Quran. And Isaac Newton, it turns out that posthumously after his death, because at the time he couldn't divulge the fact that he was a Unitarian Christian, but not Unitarian necessarily in the denomination that we have now, but Unitarian meaning that he believed in God, he believed in the Bible, but he did not believe in the divinity of Jesus, and his writings attest to that fact.
Hmm.
But he couldn't divulge it because he would have been a pariah at the time. He was, he was an academician and part of the academic scene even early on in that period of time. But it was clear that he only believed in one God. So actually, those three people, and people can make up their own lists, but they will come back to pretty much similarly the same. In one way or another, they're going to be focusing on these 100 people. Anyway, it was the one. Michael Hart was the author. Michael Hart, the 100 most influential persons in history, and Prophet Muhammad was number one. And he's not a Muslim. I believe that he's actually of Jewish background. He's a Jewish American, and therefore, he's Jewish and he's American, and he's not a Muslim. So I think that that's what more do you want in terms of a non-Muslim voice to say you need to look into this man. Um, and this is the other thing that I would say that people should understand about the Prophet Muhammad, and it actually goes. It's also tied with Islam and Muslims. As I said, that Muslims didn't have as much of an issue in terms of their faith when it comes to reason and faith. For Muslims, they go hand in hand. For the majority of Muslims, obviously. Also, there is no differentiation between church and state. When you have Muslims ruling over themselves, they don't look at it as a theocracy. So I think that the personality of Prophet Muhammad, peace be
Hmm.
upon him, was actually more genuine and more true to who we are as Westerners today, because there wasn't that dichotomy, that there wasn't that split, that I live one life, as a secular person, but then I go to church on Sunday and I have this other life. Or, like, for example, when a politician may say, at least I heard it when I was a kid, and it still holds true today, that you'll hear, as a Catholic, I'm against abortion, but as the nominee for whatever office, I'm for abortion. Okay, well, you don't have to be. You could be, keep your current, your whatever your view is, and go with that. And I think that's genuine. I think people need to know that here in the West, because that's something that we don't recognize, the split that is being caused in our personalities, in our worldviews, in our families, in the way that we conduct our lives. And I think that Muslims don't struggle with that as much, but they do struggle with the issues that we all face in a modern secular society. So I think those are the things that people should know about Prophet Muhammad. And I would add one other thing, is that I remember that Jordan Peterson, who unfortunately has, in many ways, the alliances that he's recently made have been unfortunate, but he's hit on a lot of things that I think are important to people as a psychologist, and certainly he's helped people. I think many people in terms of their personal lives. But he was asked about Islam, and he said, I have to admit that I'm ignorant on this issue, but I don't like the idea that the Prophet Muhammad was a warlord, and he used that term. He actually later, in dealing with Muslims and talking with Muslims, he retracted that statement. But it's a misconception again. War is something that in Islam is it needs to be justified. So we don't. It's like it's akin to just war theory that you find in Catholicism. But going for us, let's say in America, as Americans, going into Iraq and going into Afghanistan was just not a justified war. And even if it was, I just don't know how we look ourselves in the face claiming to be the greatest nation. And 20 years ago, we said, now it's over 20 years ago, we said we were going to kick out the Taliban. And lo and behold, 20 years later, a generation has passed. And we who consider ourselves the greatest in the world brought the Taliban back. My point is that there's this, if you're the greatest, well, you need to show greatness. And that has to be moral greatness, ethical greatness, and so forth. You don't go to war unless you have to. More veterans are dying by suicide daily than any war, since the Vietnam War, where we lost 58,000 of our soldiers. So the Muslim narrative, and you don't have to agree with the Muslim narratives, but this is what a Muslim will say. This is what the Quran says. This is what the traditions of the Prophet say, is that they went to war to preserve the existence of the community. Their war was defensive. The actions that they took were to preserve the community, and to preserve the lives of non-Muslims. As Islam showed, it's not just about tolerance, but the fact that in other places where, especially during that period, say in the 7th century, when you conquer a place, you conquer it totally. Uh, Whereas the Muslims, they allowed the Jews, the Christians, and others to continue to worship. Until this day, that's why you have a significant Christian minority in all of these places. But people converted to Islam by choice. Whereas with Christianity, it was a double-edged sword. The Spaniards went into South America and North America with the sword in one hand, and the Jesuit priests in the other. It wasn't exactly the best way to convert people.
Yeah, most certainly. And you bring up a lot of points there. Uh, so, as I was brought up as a Christian, so I know Jesus. Now, Jesus claimed. You mentioned him before. He claimed to be the Son of God. Uh, Muhammad does not do this, correct?
Correct, and yeah, and so the Quran, as I said, it doesn't. We as Muslims don't believe that Prophet Muhammad came with a new religion. We believe that all of the prophets, including Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, Solomon, John the Baptist. We believe all of these were prophets, and they all came preaching the same basic message, that there's only one God. The use of the word Son of God uh, has been used, or in the Old Testament, but even with a Jewish understanding, it was never meant as the literal Son of God.
Hmm.
It was. If you ask any Jew now, and you will see that in the Old Testament, there we say, jokingly, that there are sons by the tons. In fact, uh, David, God said David was his begotten son, and this is David. He's a human being, but God is calling him his begotten son. The point is that if you mean son or children of God in the sense that we are creations of God and God loves us so much, and that there's this paternal, sort of connotation to it, then yes, a Muslim could accept that and understand that. We don't use that terminology, but the fact that it is used doesn't mean that Jesus was the literal Son of God in a divine manner, or in any way that would bring the Creator and the created together. We believe that Jesus is a creation of God, just like all human beings, and we differentiate in Islam, and this is very important, to differentiate between the Creator and the created. And yes, God loves us, but not in the way that Christians view divine love. That God would loves us to the extent that there had to be, that God had to come down in the form of a human being and sacrifice Himself because of that love, and whoever believes in Him will have eternal life. Is a concept that we can't accept, because it blurs the relationship between the creation and the created, the creator and the creation.
So why do you hold Muhammad above? Perhaps you don't, above all the other prophets. David, you mentioned Paul, John, Jacob, and Abraham. Why is he kind of regarded a little bit more?
Right. Well, except Paul. I just said Paul probably was responsible for
Oh,
spreading Christianity,
okay.
even though, yeah, well, Christians don't consider him a prophet as well, and we certainly don't. But the others, yes.
I
No,
see.
actually, when to become a Muslim, all one has to do is to bear witness that there is no deity, God, or anything worthy of worship except the one true God, which we the proper name is Allah. But God represents that being when we say, God with a capital G, and that Prophet Muhammad is his messenger. And when you say that, you're also confirming all of the prophets who came before, which would be from Adam to Moses to Jesus to Prophet Muhammad. And we don't consider Prophet Muhammad as the best of the prophets. We, as a Muslim community, owe our tradition to his messengership, because he brought the Quran, which is the book of Revelation that was given to the Prophet Muhammad, and therefore we love him. We send our prayers on him all the time, but we consider all of the prophets and messengers in the same status with God, in terms of their closeness to God, in terms of they were commissioned to bring the message of God to people. So in that way, we actually don't differentiate. But we do consider, like, the greatest of the prophets in terms of, their effect, and their mention in the Quran, are Prophet Muhammad, and who's only mentioned, by the way, 4 or 5 times, whereas Jesus is mentioned 25 times in the
Hmm.
Quran. So you have Prophet Muhammad, Jesus, Moses, Abraham, and Noah, peace be upon him. Those are considered like the greatest of the prophets, because there are so many, and they all had different. They came at different times. Their task was similar, but the capacity of their mission would have been different from one to the other. But the great prophets, we could consider them all in the same, in the same status in so many ways.
And Jesus was a pacifist. He would, right? He would never, as far as I understand, never harm anybody, was turn the other cheek. Was Muhammad as well?
Yes, actually, just as much so. The difference was the political environment that they were in at the time. Meaning, if we look at Jesus objectively, and I'm talking about whether Christian, Muslim, or an academician regarding the life of Jesus, is that Palestine was under Roman rule. The Jews were always looking for a way to revolt against that rule, and they've always had the tradition of a Messiah that would come, a king that would overthrow the oppressive Roman rule and allow the Jews to rule over themselves. And Jesus, peace be upon him, was in that milieu. And but
Hmm.
because of the overarching power of the Roman authority at the time, he wasn't able to do that, and others weren't able to do that. When the Zealots did, the temple the temple was destroyed. Jerusalem was destroyed 70 years after Jesus, peace be upon him. So obviously, it wasn't a winning strategy. Having said that, he did say in the book of, according to the book of Revelation, that when he comes back, he will slaughter people. Literally, blood will be shed. He will come with his tongue will be a sword, and he will sit on the throne and have people brought to him, and he will slaughter them. And he did say in one verse, um, you know, I didn't come with peace; I came with the sword.
Hmm.
But that's been translated, of course, but that's been interpreted in a different way, meaning that he didn't mean it literally. So this is the environment that he was in. It doesn't take away from his peaceful nature. He was obviously peaceful, and all of the prophets were peaceful as human beings. But Moses fought the Moabites, fought many people in order to get to the borders of Palestine. He didn't get to see the Jewish people as they entered. That was Joshua, but Joshua and the story of Jericho, and I mean, we know the stories in the Old Testament, so there was a lot of bloodshed and warfare in that past history. And the God of the Old Testament, or the God of Christianity, is the same God of the Jews in the Old Testament. So there isn't any differentiation, because God doesn't change in that way. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, grew up in a different environment, and therefore, when Muslims were struggling to survive, the pagan Arabs were trying to wipe out the Prophet Muhammad and his community, and therefore warfare was defensive, and that's how it began. And at the time of the Prophet's death, the majority of the Arabian Peninsula was under his control, and they became Muslim. And so the warfare that he was engaged in was for the protection of the community. And so that's the difference. But as human beings, I think that they were both peaceful. He never raised his hand against a woman. He never raised his hand against anyone except in warfare and actual battle. And that's what you're supposed to do. If it's a situation where you're going to be killed, kill or be killed, then obviously, that that's what warfare is. But how did you get there in the first place? Was it justified or not? And obviously, it was justified in the situation of the prophet. But outside of warfare, um, he didn't raise his hand against any human being in any oppressive way. And in fact, he was just beloved. And people, you will ask historians, all different kinds of historians, from China to the United States, who study the Muslim conquest, and people will give different reasons, but it's almost unprecedented that these Bedouin Arabs, who didn't have a governmental system, didn't have a civilization like Greece and Rome and the ancient Persian civilization at the time, conquered these places, allowed people to worship, humbly accepted the knowledge that they had to offer, and then created amongst the greatest empires that the world has ever seen. I
Hmm.
mean, the golden age of Islam, from the 750s to the 1200s, 500-year period. Almost anything that we can, any technology that we talk about today would be traced back to that period. and things that the Muslim that that the Muslims built upon in terms of technology, from from the astrolabe to uh, the way that the eye works. Camera comes from the Arabic word qumr. It's an Arabic word actually, and it was the idea of a lens and having something protracted on the other side was part of Muslim inventions. And people say, even flying and so forth, all of the things that were built on in the Renaissance, all of them came from Muslim textbooks. So what happened was, the Muslims had reached actually China in the east, and they had reached Spain in the west, which is the Iberian Peninsula, was under Muslim rule for 700 years. As the Reconquista slowly took land back, they also took those books, they took all of that information, and they used that book, and they used that knowledge, and that's how the Renaissance came into Europe, and that's how gradually Europe was able to rebuild, from what they considered the Middle Ages after the Black Death, and all of these things that were so destructive to Europe, and there wasn't any technology. It was from the Muslim world that they were able to bring back, this knowledge that had been lost for a long time. But because there was a 1,000 year, almost 1,000 years of time in between, there had been so many advances by that time. So yeah, it's and again, this is I'm talking about very objective things, at least that we recognize it. So they're popping up out of the Arabian Peninsula is still like considered. How is that done? The Mongols conquered half of the known world, but where are the Mongols now?
Hmm.
I mean, and no disrespect to the Mongolian people, by the way. And what happened is, after they conquered half of the known world, many of them became Muslim. This is the funny thing, is that they accepted Islam in the Central Asian regions, and so they're still there in the form of intermarriage and the ancestry that they left behind. So no, there is a lasting effect of Muslims on the world, and it still continues to grow. Actually, in a time where, as I said, that religion seems to be receding here in the West.
Yeah, I remember reading about the Mongols and Genghis Khan. At one point, there was some crazy statistic that 10% of the world's population was related to him somehow because of the conquering and the raping and the absolutely incredible. I was always taught that algebra was Muslim creation.
Yes, by Al-Khawarizmi, who was I will get my centuries, but probably the 10th or 11th century. Yes, discovered algebra, the way that we use the x in the formulas. The zero, by the way. So the zero is a Hindu concept, which the Muslims took that and they changed the numeral system. That's why we call it the Arabic numerals. The
Right?
numerals we use today are Arabic numerals. Try doing math with the old Roman XV and all of that.
There's no
So
zero.
yes, yeah, and they didn't have the concept of the zero until it was introduced, right?
So your book, Bridging the Gap: Islam's Challenge for America, you have a series of essays, and a couple I wanted to touch upon, and you did already touch upon it, was just about violence, women, polygamy, just general misconceptions uh, towards Muslims. What can you say about those three?
So again, again, there's no statistics that would indicate that Muslims are more violent than anyone else. I think
Mm,
that violence that is unjustified um, uh, um, goes beyond religion, goes beyond race, goes beyond nationality. So you will find extremists in all walks of life, and that's a cause of violence. Injustice is also a cause of violence. It
mm.
breeds violence. When you have injustice, it causes people to do things that they otherwise wouldn't do. And violence, like anything else, there is relativism to it. Like when you have murder, there's first degree planned murder, and there's manslaughter where someone did something stupid and someone died. Yes, death is the same. There are two. The person is dead. but the motives behind it were a little different, and you have to at least treat that nuance. But so violence, I mean, there's but the Islamophobes, and there are those those who want to fearmonger about Muslims and Islam would claim that somehow Islam is somehow more violent than other religions, which just objectively is just not true. And in fact, it's anecdotal, but it really proves the point, is that they put the words of violence, the sword, other things, into a computer, and they found that the Bible was percentage wise, was including the New Testament, by the way, much more than the Quran. The word sword isn't even used in the Quran once, but it's replete over 250 times in the Christian Bible, including the Old and the New Testament, mostly in the Old Testament, of course. But my point is that it's, objectively speaking, it's not. In terms of women, also huge misunderstanding. And actually, what's interesting is the times that we live in, um, is that people are actually closer to the Muslim, perspective, I want to say, on women than we actually think. There's sort of a there's sort of a I want to say, a counter sort of narrative against feminism. Many, you see what Jordan Peterson and other influencers like Andrew Tate are attracting young men, is because you have in the West, where there's this narrative that men are the ones who have been oppressing women, historically speaking. Women are now more and more able to compete. I shouldn't even use the word compete, but are able to do what men are doing. And on one level, we applaud that. We see the benefits of that. But on the other level, it's actually destroying society. Women aren't having babies in Europe and in America. If you look at the white population, it's actually decreasing.
Yeah.
Well, that's not fine. You may maintain that for the next 20, 30 years, but it's not something, or 100 years, but it's not something that you can continue if a group of people want to continue their race. But in addition to that, even if they're not having babies, they're just saying, like, why did we want to do this? Okay, so a woman proves that she can be a CEO, she can be a partner at a law firm. But then at age, in her 30s, 40s, she discovers, okay, but this is not what I want. I'd rather, be I don't want to say be a housewife necessarily, but this idea of men competing with women, I think is all. I think is it has its repercussions in the society, and it's affecting other things like gender and so forth. That if we need to go into, we would. But so my point about women is simply this: is that the Quran laid down the rights of men and women 1,400 years ago. Women were and have been able to inherit as women from that time until now. Women were unable to do that in America until within the last. I mean, I think even in the 1800s, when a man and a woman married, the property of the woman became the property of the man. In Islam, you never had that. They actually inherit. They come with their own property. They don't take on their husband's surnames unless they want to. You will find now many Muslims in America, husband and wife, they both have different names. Even though they can take on the name of the husband, they don't have to. So in terms of inheritance, and then the idea is that God has made it clear that men and women, in terms of their spirituality, in terms of the way that God views them, they're totally equal. The issue goes to really the physiology and the disposition by nature of who we are. We were made to complement each other. And, I just don't like this idea that, oh, man, it's the patriarchy. This is the problem that women are facing. Pitting the races against each other doesn't work. But the, the the ideal is that you have a man and a wife who are married, they have children, they raise those children. The parents each take a role. The man goes out, fends for the family, guides the family. The woman preserves the sanctity of the family, the raising of the children, supports the husband supports the wife. and that way you're in a better position to deal with all of the problems of society. But when you hit a when you hit away against that, then you lose all of that. They've found that let's face it, kids do better when they have two parents raising them, a man and a woman, than if it was just a woman or just a man, or other types. And so violence, women, again, and women. Look at Muslim women. I mean, they wear the head covering and so forth, but they're in Harvard. They're in the Ilhan Omar is in Congress. I mean, there's nothing stopping from women to accomplish what they want. The point is that we don't have to pit the genders, the races, the sexes against each other. And what was the third thing you said? The violence, women, and
Polygamy.
polygamy. Well, so polygamy is interesting. Um, 20 years ago, maybe now more, Pew did a research, did a poll regarding the sensibilities of Americans regarding polygamy. And 20 years ago, the number was very low. And every year it has climbed to the point where, in the most recent, and probably up to the book, I think it was over 16. Actually, I think it was 20%. So that means 20% of Americans, 1 out of 5, are more welcoming of the idea of polygamy than they would have been 20 years ago. But polygamy, again, I think is a solution for the West's problem, but they don't want to recognize it. Meaning that the population of the West is receding, so a woman can have 100 husbands, but she's only going to have one child from those relationships, whereas a man can have 4 wives and conceivably have children from each of those wives. So as a procreation issue, there's no issue there. Like
Mm.
there's no debate when we talk about that. Number two, it's it's not the nature of men to be leches like some of our elected officials and the kind of stuff that we have, the crazy stuff that we have here. But they could have saved themselves a lot of heartache. Instead of cheating on their wives, they could have taken on a legitimate second or third wife with responsibility. See, this is when you take on a second wife. First of all, you have to be able to be fair to them in terms of your time, in terms of your money, and in terms of the material treatment that you give them. You may have in your heart that you love one more than the other, but you have to be fair in terms of the way that that in the ways that you treat them. And if you can't do that, then you're limited to one. But to go cheat on your wife or to have a mistress, and society condemns, it's weird that we encourage individual freedom, but when people fall into this, especially politicians, we don't forgive them. They lose their careers and so forth. But a lot of our presidents have been known to have mistresses, from Bush to Kennedy to the others. I mean, it's a well-known fact, even with the founding fathers. So why not legitimize that by allowing these women to also inherit, have lead respectable lives? Look at the gossip and the conspiracy theories over Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe. I mean, it's like, but so that's another issue. The idea also that, as I said, that men and women both enjoy sexual relations to the same degree. I don't, would not question that in terms of also the woman's right to enjoy orgasm and to enjoy the same benefits. But the way that we're geared, and again, this is based on disposition physiology. Women are more, let's say, aroused by reading erotica, whereas men are more aroused by viewing porn, for example, and porn especially is very bad, and we also see the negative fallout of that. But the point is that it's easier for a man to be aroused, and so and a man can continue to have children up to the time they die, even if they're 90s. Actually, my grandfather had his last child when he was 75 years old. He had 12 children total, between 2 wives. But the point is that there is a time that women don't procreate at some point. And so physiologically, it makes more sense. And as I said, there are women right now because of what we've done, marriage as an institution, what we've done to that institution. You'll have very successful women and so forth who they don't want a husband around all the time. In other words, they don't need a man there 24 hours a day, and but they want that relationship. So for women, if you want to lead a moral life, now again, in modern society, people don't care. Actually, in Germany after World War II, they considered polygamy. They gave it serious thought, but they finally decided against it. But after World War II, when Hitler was sending out 15-year-old boys to the battlefront, the ratio of women to men was so high. So a woman had either she had to be celibate, never marry, never have experience with a man, or she was going to be a mistress or engage in extramarital sex, or be a second wife. I mean, those were choices. Now, as I said, this is the norms of what's acceptable and what's not has changed. But the changing of those norms hasn't made anything better for us. So the issues with gender and homosexuality and so forth isn't a solution. So polygamy, I think, is there. There's nothing wrong with it. And actually, Islam. So when Islam came and we believe that God put a limit on it. Before Islam, there was absolutely no limitation on the number of wives that a man can take. And by that time, the institution of marriage obviously was well established. Solomon was known to have 300 wives and
Right.
700 concubines in the Bible. Um, the Islam limited it to four. So the practice of the majority of Mormons, of course, have outlawed polygamy. There's still a minority of Mormons who practice polygamy, but there's no limitations on the number of wives. And that so there again, it's this idea of moderation. Don't have one wife and commit adultery, but at the same time, don't have 100 wives
Yeah.
and just go around. You have to use, and I think that I portrayed it in the book as a way to solve problems, not to make problems. But I think it would save a lot of the issues that we have. Just the idea of like if there's, I mean, I think they gave the example if you have a the girlfriend of a wife is so much at home and the wife leaves and all of a sudden the man and the girlfriend have a tryst. It's not fair. If there's going to be that close relationship, well, make it up on the up and up. She gets to inherit, she gets the same rights, and if they don't like that, fine, but then don't cheat, don't do things that they in themselves are not solutions or better situations. So yeah, I mean, I think that and the majority of people are not polygamous, but I think it's meaning that even in Islam, it's not like all men could afford it or want it or do it, but it's there in order to be parallel with the nature of men and women. And it doesn't mean the women won't be jealous, by the way, but still, again, we're talking about looking for solutions, and we're not living in a utopian world. But there are certain things that we can say are wrong if we have ethical and moral sensibilities that I think that we've lost in the West. So some people may be listening and saying, what's he talking about? Well, like, who's talking about getting married and who's talking about marrying a man, a man marrying a woman? Well, that's fine, but you haven't done much to make society any better. And just because we do things here in America and in the West doesn't mean that the rest of the world accepts that. There are 8 billion people in the world. And when they hear about genderism and the things that, goes on, they're not happy with it. But if we think that we're the most superior of people, and so what we do is what the whole world has to do or accept, no, I think that that's arrogant. And that's part of the problem is that
Very
we
arrogant.
don't want to, recognize for things for what they are.
Fascinating case for polygamy, Ashraf. I've always thought that, and I think it's very similar, by the way. Prostitution is there's consenting adults. Two consenting adults agree to a transaction. I mean, with polygamy as well. If they're consenting adults, what's the problem? Why does the government need to get involved? It's a very interesting take. I think it's along those lines. Coming back to women, we see now in Iran where we see women kind of revolting. Now, is that more towards the government or is it more towards Islam?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, unfortunately, you can't look at Iran through an American through an American lens
Right.
or the media. I think that there's a combination. So there's no doubt that the Western progress and capitalism and the situation that we're in now causes people around the world to look towards that. You have people in South Korea and Latin America, they're accepting Christianity. But believe me, it's not so much that they necessarily, you know, are convinced by Christianity, but they are certainly convinced with American power and American materialism. So
Mm.
that is something that we portray, and you'll see that if American power and legitimacy starts to wane, so will the fringes of those people who were enticed by it and accepted it. Because what is the religion of American capitalism? It's attached with Christianity, so it kind of goes hand in hand. But having said that, and this is not to attack the faith of or what people choose, but I guess my point is that with Iran, there's more than one thing happening. Yes, Iran has been under brutal sanctions for decades by the United States, and the joke is that there isn't one Iranian base around the United States in any capacity, but there are dozens or half a dozen bases around Iran from America. Iran has never attacked America. See, this is the problem. In 1952, I believe it was 1952 or 53, there was an elected president of Iran. His name was Mossadegh. Well, the CIA was, just getting underway, and the CIA had been and created, and they basically decided to overthrow him, and they did. It's
Hmm.
that simple. There's no other way of considering it. The Iranians never forgot that he was duly elected in democratic, fair elections, and he was taken out of power by the CIA. The Shah was brought back into power, and we've been meddling in that country ever since.
Wow.
And so you do have a division in society. Part of it is a reaction to the Islamic government in Iran, because there is oppression. There's no doubt about that, and unfortunately, they don't give a good impression of what Islam should be. But by nature, the Iranian people are conservative, and so the women are they're it depends. Some are being egged on by the West and this you know that they want to be more free and so forth, and others are disturbed by the government, by government policies. But let's not take it out of context. No one is calling for, let's say, necessarily, at least the majority are not calling for the overthrow of the government, for example. No, they want reforms, they want change, they want the lifting of the sanctions, they want to be able to do things that people are allowed to do in other places. But it's not just that they're being oppressed, and this is the reason. I just feel that women are being oppressed in the West. It's just a different type of
Mm.
oppression, because at the end of the day, we want the same things as human beings in terms of finding real happiness that's uh, spiritual more than material and so forth. But yeah, there's a history tied with Iran. I'm not a specialist on Iran, but I know that anytime that there are these demonstrations, that we take them out of context, because what do
Hmm.
we want to do here? We want to change the regime. When Trump was president, he ditched the treaty between the U.S. and Iran, and since Trump, they haven't been able to get back on track. And it's a political issue more than anything else.
Unfortunately, a lot of these things we have to, yeah, follow the money, Ashraf. Unfortunately,
It's,
that's what happens here in the
I
U.S.,
agree.
isn't it? You talked about worshiping a god in the beginning of our conversation, and perhaps way too many Americans are worshiping the money. So on the podcast, we talk about discipline. I lost a lot of weight. And I found myself. I started a business. I found myself at 340 pounds. The doctor said, "You're not going to see your daughter graduate. You're pre-diabetic, pre-hypertension. You got to do." So I took time away, a year and a half. I lost 130 pounds. I did a bunch of things. And people always ask me, they want a quick answer. How'd you do it? And I always say discipline. That's it. I got focused and I got discipline. I wonder how discipline plays a role in your life.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and yeah, this is what I like about your program: the focus on discipline, which is an like it's an aspect, right? It's a factor. It's needed. You can't accomplish things without it. I look at things in a holistic method process, and it comes from my faith tradition as a Muslim. We're expected to do things in moderation. We're expected to follow commandments that were handed down to us, and so there anything we basically our worldview is that of the faith, what we believe God wants of us, and so and we will find ourselves in all these bad situations, and there's a solution of how to get out of them. And so, for example, being overweight, and that was a concern that I had as well, and so like fasting was something that was a way to lose weight, and yes, discipline becomes an important part of that. I actually matured in terms of discipline, meaning as a kid, I wasn't very disciplined, and it took me a long time to discover the power of discipline. But I realized that discipline alone, without a, a moral, clear vision, is also where it may cause you to do incredible things,
Hmm.
but in and of itself is not the like the silver bullet. But it's never. And the reason I say that I didn't have is because as a kid, in terms of studying, in terms of school, in terms of just relationships and what I wanted out of life wasn't clear because I didn't have the discipline. I didn't know what I wanted. And when you don't know what you want, you're not disciplined because you're doing things that are, you're just bumming around, so to speak. And you don't accomplish a lot. So, but when you have discipline, you change you change your life. But in order to want to change your life, you have to then have you have to have a vision. And I think that's what you need before you need discipline, because discipline without guidance, also I feel isn't it's not the only answer, but it's certainly a component that you can't do without. Great people and anyone who's accomplished anything has not been able to do it without discipline. So I've struggled with discipline. The more disciplined I become in my life, the more I'm able to achieve. And the book is an example. I've always had ideas. I've written things down. I've done some research, but it took discipline to sit down and
Hmm.
do the book. And actually, part of it was through uh, and now I'm blanking on and this is not good because they did so well for me. But the program at Georgetown University, Professor Eric Koster basically had his students, the idea that he came up with. He had his students write a book in one semester, literally in 4 months, and he realized I can do this with many people. And so there was a program, the Creators Institute, it's called the Creators Institute. So they basically uh, get you to write your book. You have your idea what book you want to write. They help you to write it by providing all the resources and materials and editing and coaching that you need. And that's what got me to sit down on Sundays to sit and write and so forth. And I found, oh my God, I have all this stuff to write. I didn't realize that. And it took discipline, which I didn't have. It's something that progressed over time. We have some discipline, right? But some people are more disciplined than others. There are people who are just born disciplined in the sense that they've been trained to be disciplined, but it's at the expense of something else.
Mm.
The ones who weren't disciplined but discover it, they struggle. So it's always a moderation. If you're lucky, your childhood had discipline in it, and you build on it. But an extreme of one or the other is not good. But certainly, I mean, that's what it took to write this book, is discipline, I have to say.
And Did the Prophet Muhammad mention discipline? How do you feel he would review it? He would view it.
This is another thing that you asked about, what what we could learn here in the West from about Islam or Muslims, or the Prophet Muhammad. And you will be surprised to learn. So psychology studies the mind, behavior, and so forth, correct? As a science, it's only been around since the 1800s.
Hmm.
Okay, as a formal science, it's only been around since the 1800s. The Muslims had studied psychology as we know it, with the terms, with observation, since the golden age of Islam. And discipline is one of the things that's incorporated in psychology and in the traditions of Muslims, which, by the way, as I said, it's not like they discovered, created or invented all of these things. No, you'll find it in Greek philosophy, you'll find it in Roman history, you'll find it in Persian civilization, Chinese civilization. But Muslims were able, because they, by the way, and if you look at the map where Muslims are, they're in the center of everything. They're on the borders with China, on the borders with India, on the borders with Europe. They're, so they were able to collect all of this information. But the idea of discipline in psychology and the mind is a strong Islamic tradition,
Hmm.
and we believe that a Muslim, by definition, has to be disciplined. Why? Because we believe that actions are based on intentions. So you get rewarded or punished by God based on your actions. If you intend something bad and you don't do it, you actually get a good reward. But if you intend something bad and you do it, you carry it out, you carry out the action, then you you've just committed a sin. If you do a good deed, then it could be rewarded multiple times. But the idea is that we're always fighting our soul. Let's say the ego. The ego wants you to do. The ego wants as much sex as possible, or the the inner whims that we have. We want as much sex as possible. We want as much money as possible. We want this. But if you don't control it, it's going to eat you alive. And how do you control it? It's that spiritual discipline. And that was, I mean, this is Islam, this is the Prophet's message. He was known for being a disciplined person. And one of the things, by the way, when we talk about knowing the Prophet Muhammad, is even Orientalists, people who are not Muslim. Orientalists are those who study the East and study Islam and so forth, who are not Muslim. They said that one of the things about the life of the Prophet Muhammad is that um, what his personal life was the same as his public life. So there wasn't a contradiction. There wasn't any hypocrisy, and that's because of his discipline, because of his nature. That if there was no food in the home that given day, he decided to fast. He didn't tell his wife, go, I need food, go find food or whatever. No, he would fast. And my point is that these kind of things take discipline. It's easier to blame someone than to fast. It's easier to do something else than to control yourself. And that's what Islam talks about. And actually, even in the Middle Ages, we're studying a book now in school for one of the Middle Age scholars, and it's recently been translated into English by Overmere Enjum, who's a professor at Pittsburgh, in the University of in Pittsburgh. And it's a whole manual about spirituality, but it talks about discipline and how to discipline
Hmm.
yourself. What are the methods? What are the things that you can do? And see Islam. That's why, again, Islam doesn't look for solutions, because Islam has the solutions. We look here at meditation. How do we discipline ourselves? Oh, let's see what do the Buddhists have to say about meditation. Let's see what we can adopt. Now psychology is studying meditation and understanding that meditation is important, whereas the Muslims have always been practicing meditation. And through meditation, but we don't call it meditation because it's our daily prayers. We have a connection directly with God. We pray 5 times a day, but we're in connection with God throughout the day. And by the way, you cannot be busy, 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 busy throughout your day and then just say, oh, I want to take 5 minutes of the day just to pray. You won't be able to do it. You have to be disciplined throughout the whole day
Mm.
where you're not busy, busy, busy. You're actually always going towards something that you can take 5 minutes out of the day to be a little bit more, disciplined or meditative. And that's what the prayers do for us. But you have to be disciplined. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle. But certainly, Islam and the Prophet Muhammad have talked about it and practice it in a way that is actually effective and relevant to our times today.
What a wonderful answer, Ashraf. What a wonderful answer. Great, great perspective there. I didn't know 99% of that. It's absolutely enthralling. Ashraf Nubani, what motivates you?
That's a good question. What motivates any of us, or any of us? I think what motivates me is my faith. But when I say my faith, yes, I came to my faith by my own volition. Yes, it's a choice. There's no doubt about it. But Islam, you asked about Islam and Muslim. What Islam means is it means submission. And I think that it's arrogant of human beings who don't have an answer for where they came from, what their purpose in life is, not to submit to something. And what do you submit to? Why do I believe that I'm the freest person on the face of the earth? Why? Because I submit my will to the unseen creator of the heavens and the earth. I don't submit my will to any man. I don't submit my will to any status. I don't submit my will to money. I don't submit my will to a habit. I don't submit my will to an influencer. I don't. My point is not that I don't fall into that, because we're all human beings. But how can you truly be free as a human being on earth unless you give up all of these enslaving things
Mm.
and you decide that you're going to dedicate your life to one overarching thing, and that is to your creator? And because he's unseen, people will say, well, he doesn't exist. Fine. But because he's unseen, it by definition means that I'm not a slave to anything else on earth. What I don't know how you can be freer than that. Everyone else is a slave to something, and we are all slaves to something. Every human being is a slave, and I mean a slave to something. So, what do you want to be a slave to? So, I feel that my motivation is just my belief in God. It doesn't make me a better person than any other human being. It just means that this is the choice that I've taken, and I'm not alone, because Muslims have have made that choice, and believing in God, at least, we're also not alone, because there are 2 billion Christians who also feel the same way. So, but the idea of being in connection with your creator and then going back to legitimate authoritative sources in our for Muslims, it's the Quran. The Quran is something also that the West should know about. It's no matter what anyone says, it's an incredible book. The fact that it's being used today in this way, yes, people will read the Bible, right? But they will say, the history of the Old Testament, Genesis, Deuteronomy, the Torah, the five books, they don't mean that much to me. I like to look at the passages where, the Sermon on the Mount for Jesus, or, when he said, if you're looking at a splinter in someone's eye, look at the log in your eye. In other words, before you
Mm.
condemn people, look at, okay, yeah. And we love those things because they're actually, those are wonderful sayings, and we actually adopt them. And this is the thing, that for Christians who become Muslims, they never have to give up Jesus, because we believe in Jesus. Whereas Jews don't accept Jesus as a prophet, and people who are non-Muslim or non-Christian don't even accept Jesus for anything. I mean, he's of little relevance to them. But the point is that the Quran is still valid for us. We live by the tenets that are in that book, and people are now studying, especially after 9/11. It's become so well, or on the way to becoming so well studied in the academic field, and they want to put it to the same criticisms that Western academia has done for the Bible, about what's called Bible criticism. But the problem that they're having with Islam or the Quran is that even though they don't believe that it comes from God, um, the regardless of all the way out theories and that people are coming up with, there's there's a consensus that this is a book that was promulgated and basically was there 1400 years ago, which is right after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. And the Muslims have been able to maintain it as is, unlike the
Right.
Bible, which is in different languages. The scholars are still now deciding what was later introduced, what was a scribal mistake, and so forth. But in essence, the Quran is still the same, and it's still being used by Muslims and effectively. Let me and some of the verses like are incredible when you look at them. One that at least with atheists, one verse says in the Quran, it says. خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. Were they created from nothing, or are they the creators of themselves? It's a rhetorical question that God asks. He just asks you, did you create yourself, or were you created from nothing? Well, if not, then think about where potentially your creation came from.
Hmm.
Another verse says that it says, "Do not those who disbelieve." That means they don't accept the truth. Don't they look that the heavens and the earth were together, and we rent them asunder, and from every living thing was created from water? NASA now, where it spends billions of dollars to go out in space to look for what? They're looking for water. Everyone knows water is the essence of life. And I'm not saying that the Quran is a book of science that it talks about the Big Bang theory, but the verse says that
Hmm.
the heavens and the earth were together, were the heavens and the earth were together, meaning that there was that there was some mass that was together, and it was rent asunder. The Big Bang theory is that this is how the universe is expanding and so forth. My point is that this verse, no one disputes that these verses were around 1,400 years ago. They just it wasn't the contemplation of just some Arab Bedouin sitting looking at the stars coming up with these verses. We believe that these verses are inspired. They're from they're from God. And there's like it's replete like that. Even the embryo of how it develops in the womb. Yes, there was some people knew that, okay, that it's a man and a woman coming together, and the baby grows, but they didn't know, did the flesh come first, did the bones come first, how did the Quran says it stage by stage, to a point where you look at it now and you say, yeah, that's pretty accurate. That's what science knows. Now we call it trisemesters. We do this, we do that, but the essence of it was there. It isn't Bedouins that came up with this in the desert. So this
Hmm.
is something that when people ask, what are you inspired by? That's the point. Here in the West, what are we inspired by? If we're inspired by, like you said, money, well, okay, that's fine. Then money is your slave. Money is your God. Money comes and goes. Money, can bring good and it can bring evil. Money doesn't give you happiness at the end of the day. And if that's what inspires you, then you will get what you intended, what your inspiration was. But a Muslim's inspiration is more than that. And yet, Islam is not communism. It's not capitalism. It says that, one of the, like, it's so incredible actually that in Islam you're encouraged. The Protestants would have nothing on the Muslim work ethic in terms of, you have to work hard, you have to wake up. The first prayer is at before dawn, before the sun rises, not at sunrise. It's before the sun rises that you wake up and you do your first prayer, and you go out and you seek, early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. This is from the Quran.
Hmm.
But beyond that, you have to work hard. You have to put food on the table and all of that. It's good to have wealth, and if you have wealth, you actually then have to pay more than people who don't. And this is where people misunderstand. Here people are accumulating wealth. Yeah, I'll give some money to the people devastated in Turkey here and there and so forth.
Hmm.
No, Islam makes it, it's like it's part of who you are. One verse which I recently came across, which I found was incredible, I didn't realize it even until then, and that's another thing, that we always find inspiration on an ongoing basis. It says that the money that comes to the prophet, so the money that the Muslims donate or that is obligated on them, is for God first and foremost, meaning your intention has to be for God, and then it's for the prophet to allocate. Why? He says to give to the poor, to the wayfarer, and to those in need, so that the people who have money don't keep that money only for themselves. In other words, the wealth has to circulate. And I
Mm.
was like, wow, this isn't, really, this is incredible. So for a Muslim, you're not a communist, you're not a capitalist, you're a moral person. People are starving, they need food. People don't have healthcare, they need healthcare. This is not socialism. Where Islam is totally against socialism, because socialism basically is a perception, the idea that there is no God, and they want to make everyone equal and so forth. No, Islam doesn't say that. The people came to the prophet and they said, these rich people, no, there was well, oh yeah, the prophet had told people that to get rewards is to glorify God after the prayer. So both the rich people and the poor people heard that. So the poor people came and they said, the rich people now heard that they just have to do these things after prayer, and they're also getting reward, but they also have, they're also rich. And the prophet said, well, this is the way that God, he gives some people things that he doesn't give others.
Mm.
But both people have to be satisfied with who they are. If you're rich, you have to take care of the poor. If you're poor, you have to accept, not accept being poor, by the way, but I mean accept the fact that yes, there may be people who are richer than I, but am I, good with my Lord? The point is that there's always inspiration that I find, and I'm not a perfect person by any means, and neither is anyone, but I do dedicate my life to what I believe God wants of us. I didn't create myself. I don't think that it came from anything. I mean, from nothing, and therefore, I choose to be a Muslim and submit my will to God, and that's my motivation.
So, how do you measure success?
Success is attaining the life, after this life. That's what I believe is success. And you do it, so it's actually, you win both ways. If you do things right on earth, you're actually happier. So again, you may not be the richest person in the world, but are you truly happy? Meaning, are you happier than the next guy? And I believe that leading a moral, decent life run by ethics makes a person at the end of the day happier than a person who doesn't have those same ethics. People here, we have habits, whether it's alcohol or porn or issues with gender or family issues or whatever. Muslims experience that even here in the United States, but to a lesser degree. In other words, if you look at all of the statistics that are harming society, Muslims actually hold up, and not just Muslims, but by the way, practicing Christians as well, because they have a support system. They have guidance in terms of knowing that this is wrong. They find, they find comfort in family, a support system, and believing in God, and going to church and having community and so forth. And that overall makes people, happier. So, um, I mean, uh, and I think I lost sight of the question that you had.
Success.
Yeah, success. And so, yes, and so this is very important that if we, we're made of Joey, we're made of elements of the earth. People also agree about that. We have iron, we have selenium, we're made of elements of the earth. And I believe that God created us from the elements of the earth, or we have elements of the earth. And just because we die and this body, goes 6 feet under, doesn't mean that those constituted elements can't be reconstituted by the one who constituted them in the first place. So I believe that there's an afterlife, and in order to
Mm.
be successful in that afterlife, you have to be successful here, and being successful here means accepting, submitting your will to God, and following rules that you otherwise wouldn't want to follow if you were a slave to something else. And Jordan Peterson in the right wing, and he's not, by the way, I mean, he doesn't consider himself right wing, so
No.
I'm not gonna label him. But those on the right who talk about the good things and so forth, and they say, discipline yourself, have a get married, do all of these things. Yeah, they do it, but you have to do it. You have to do it for the right reasons. It's not easy, but you find that you feel you're more of a man when you do what's difficult rather than doing what's easy. And that's why feminism has us on our back feet, is because we're not being the men that we should be. But being the man is hard, and it means a war, but it means a real war, not the wars that we go to and our veterans come back and commit suicide. No, the
Mm,
war where you're really defending your family, your honor, your country, and so forth. It's justified. That's the kind of and it's not, again, we don't need just male bravery. No, we need to do what's right, even if it's difficult. Like Kennedy said, we don't do things because they're easy, we do them because they're hard,
mm.
with his eastern
Boston accent.
Boston accent, right? So, and that's true. That's what makes people great. Otherwise, yeah, we could all be mediocre. So success lies with the life you choose to lead. And once you've chosen that life, you stick to it as much as you can, by the way. And this is the other thing. You may not forgive yourself. God is more merciful to us. Every verse of every uh, portion of the Quran, which is termed a chapter, but it's really more than that. But it's termed a chapter, and there are 114 chapters. All but one start with the preface, "In the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful." And the Merciful, He's more merciful to us than a woman's womb is for the child and the caring of a mother. So
Mm.
God is forgiving if we understand that, then, and we try to live up to those criteria. Then we seek and hope for God's forgiveness and for His mercy. But success is measured by attaining success both in this life, but more importantly in the hereafter, in the life to come.
I enjoy hearing your perspective, and I really do. And it gives me hope, Ashraf. Yeah, I watched some of your sermons online. I've watched some of your interviews, and you're very genuine, and you're very kind, and you're confident. You're never arrogant. You never say, "Hey, this is the way it is. Listen to me now." You put it out and say, "This is what I believe. This is what I believe with all my heart," and I just think when there's more of that, when people are open to listening, even if they don't agree, just understand that this person is genuine and loving, and the community is as well. And we can live together, and we can live in harmony, and we can hear each other's perspective and not dig in and just say, "That's so fascinating. I'm going to do some thinking on that," and just be open to that. I think we'll all be better. It gives me hope. And I really enjoyed our time today. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, how can they do so?
So basically, my email is really the medium of choice at this point. I'm also on LinkedIn, but my email is aw nubani, my last name Nubani, at gmail.com. And that's how people can be in touch.
You're by law, by education, a lawyer, and you help.
Yes, I have
Yeah.
a law practice,
Yes.
on point law. It's a general practice, but I do mostly immigration. Immigration law is my practice, so that's my career. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and some of the cases that you've had, I mean, you're a fascinating man, and I wish you more success, and I hope one day if I'm in there in the East, we get to sit and have a cup of coffee. That would be wonderful.
Well, you're welcome, and I hope that you will do that. If you come to the east, give me a call, and we'll sit down. I'm outside of DC,
So DC, yeah.
and yeah, I
Yeah.
would love that.
Thank you so much for your time today. You be well, and I look forward to I wish you continued success, and maybe see each other in the future. Be well, please.
Thank you, and you too. The same to you and to your family.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Disciplined Conversations.